I get to
Okay.
see you while we talk now.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying out some new technology, as I was just mentioning, so that you can see us, and we're looking forward to seeing how this goes, to see if this might be something we implement into more of our courses, as long as we can co-manage it all. So tonight we're doing is writing a memoir on your bucket list, which is going to be recapping some general but important themes that we like to talk about and trying to get people motivated, on track, and or restarting if that's what you're doing. So it applies to lots and lots of you. And a note here before I introduce us is that we are always doing these kinds of webinars as a preview for lots of the other courses that we do. And so tonight is a free offering. We love to do free offerings, and at the end we're going to talk a little bit about some upcoming stuff that we have going on in the fall. So just want to give you a note that that's coming. So Linda Joy, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Okay. I'm the president of the National Association of Memoir Writers and author of several books. My memoir is Don't Call Me Mother, A Daughter's Journey from Abandonment to Forgiveness, and The Power of Memoir and Journey of Memoir, which is a memoir workbook. And we co-authored a book, well, go ahead, you say it.
Okay. Yeah, we co-authored a new book called Breaking Ground on Your Memoir, Craft and Motivation for Memoir Writers. And that book is an ebook, but we actually are going to be turning it into a print book in the spring because we've gotten a lot of people interested in it as a print book. So we'll be looking forward to having that for sale in both formats pretty soon. And I'm Brooke. I'm the publisher of She Writes Press. I used to be the executive editor at Seal Press. I have a coaching practice called Warner Coaching, where I coach writers to publication. And I have two books, What's Your Book and How to Sell Your Memoir. And I am currently working on a new book, which is called Greenlight Your Book. So I was laughing that all of my print books will have to have the word book or memoir in the title. So that's who we are, and we're going to move right into our content here. And just want to welcome you all, say thank you for joining us. And we can see your information in the chat window, in the questions window. So please say hi. Well, we see a lot of familiar names, so thank you for coming. And you can always see your questions there for when we do Q&A, and we're going to have a robust, pretty solid 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So feel free, don't hesitate to put in your questions. Okay, so we're starting out with a very simple question.
I love the picture.
Why do people do this? Why do people write memoir? And we're going to go ahead and launch in with some of our notes here. And I'm starting with this idea of because you can't not write. And this is kind of like the compulsion to write, which some people certainly feel. For other people, it's like the air that they breathe. I have had clients who have said to me that they don't feel well when they're not writing. And I have people who are not themselves when they're not writing, that it's really part of their identity and who they are. And so you may be a person who just feels like you cannot not write. And also an interesting component of this piece of who, if this pertains to you, is that when you're not writing, you feel badly about it. There are people who are kind of like there's a guilty factor because you're not really feeling complete or like your whole self when you're not writing. And so if you're one of these people, we want to help you to be in a place where you're writing more often.
I've heard people say it's like they're letting themselves down because they really secretly want to do it, but they're not.
Yeah, exactly.
So something that I hear people say a lot is that they want to write a legacy about their life, or they want to leave a legacy for family and friends. And the thing of it is that, as we're living, we are living history. We're living through history, and we're alive during many different amazing moments that happen. So we're having a personal history in the context of the history of where we are, where we live, who we are, who we know. And this is very interesting. A lot of people ask us, I know they ask you too, Brooke, was this really interesting? And I mean, 99.9% of the time we say absolutely yes, because I don't know about that world. I don't know about that life. And you're taking me to a place that I don't know anything about, and thank you, I want to go there. As well as being able to leave something for family and friends, our wisdom and what we've come to learn and understand about the world. So a lot of people have that very passionate desire to write their legacy.
Yeah, and then to write your legacy in a way that feels good and that you're proud of is kind of the next component. I actually just worked with someone who wrote a full version of essentially his legacy manuscript and then self-published it, and had sort of felt like it was good enough, but then when it came out in print, he decided he wanted to keep working on it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to do a revision, and I was encouraging of that just to get it to that place. And
that's one time to edit.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's not ideal, but they're, it's an interesting
good
process.
idea.
Everyone's journey is different. And so then the next one is because you're writing the book that you wanted to read when you were going through an experience. This one is pretty common, that you may have looked around, figured out that the exact experience that or help that you were looking for wasn't there. I mean, any kind of person has this experience. It's usually when you're going through a hardship or you've experienced something and gotten to the other side of it, and then you feel like you have something to offer people. So this is a pretty strong one, and
that
a
happened
great
to me.
reason.
Yeah, that happened to me when I was writing Don't Call Me Mother. I couldn't find books about abandoned children or mothers abandoning their children. I thought, gosh, I guess I'll have to write it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm glad you did.
So, and then, on the heels of that, we also want to write, we need to write, perhaps, we may feel we need to write to sort out our life, to understand our life better. I know someone who says she doesn't know what she's thinking or how she really feels until she gets an image or picks a topic and it starts to flow through her. And also one of my favorite authors and a wonderful woman who just wrote The Art of Slow Writing, Louise DeSalvo, she says she writes so she can understand herself. And I think this reason, a lot of people are, well, there's a lot of conversation about memoir. We're going to say more about that. You hear pros and cons, but then I think a lot of people forget that these are really good reasons to write your story, to write a memoir. And they're very quiet reasons, but they're very important, and I've seen them make huge differences in people's lives.
Well, and sometimes quiet reasons are the best reasons, because when there's a push from the external world that is driving you around money or fame or bestsellership or whatever the things are, oftentimes that doesn't give you the internal drive quite in the same way that those really powerful internal motivators do. So it's a good one. And then we have here to help others, which is sort of like, because you're writing the book that you wanted to read, that you feel strongly that you have something that truly could change the world. And I really don't think that's too big of a goal. It's something that could truly help others. That could be anything from, how you got through or out of an abusive relationship, or the sense that you made in going through an experience that you went through. So many memoirs I've read really have helped me to contextualize a certain kind of experience in a different way. And so really thinking about what motivated you and what helped you get to the other side of something can be, especially if you're starting or getting back in, it can be a helpful thing to grasp onto, because it's part of the larger thematic aspect of your memoir that is truly helpful to others. And I think it's a nice thing to have at the core of your motivation.
And I think sometimes some people find it easier to keep writing their memoir if they think they are helping someone else. They're like questioning, oh, it's really just all about me. But if they think, oh, I'm helping somebody else, then sometimes that helps them keep going. It's both, but sometimes having that larger motivation is helpful. And then I've seen it. I've taught some writing as healing, therapeutic writing classes for many years now. And I also trained therapists in the technique of using their own stories to help them understand themselves better and be able to use these techniques with their clients. There's been studies on how much writing the truth and writing through trauma helps to heal, including various physical illnesses and ailments like asthma and arthritis. It's been shown that writing improves the immune system. There's been a lot of studies by a man named Dr. James Pennebaker and others. And these are wonderfully inspiring things to read about. But a lot of us, like when I read the studies, I was like, oh, finally there's a study that proves that I already knew, which was how helpful it was to get my story out of me and onto the page. And these days there's also some new research, brain scans and other types of body information we can get now that shows what writing does to the brain, to the body, and how it creates positive changes. So you may not be the first thing you think of when you're sitting down, but but these things are really available for you to learn more about. What were you going to say, Brooke?
Oh, I just think it's an important piece and fascinating. And a lot of people have some judgment, I think, about writing to heal. And and yet what's important to know as we move into the last topic here is that every single one of these points might refer to you. And I think the more you have, the better. And part of this is grasping onto the things that are going to help you remember why you wanted to write in the first place, and or the things that are going to help you keep going.
Right. And then, this other reason, which I found rather fun to think about, and is very, very true for me, it's the love of developing a new skill. I mean, when you're learning something new and keeping yourself sharp, you are tuning your brain, You're using a lot of different parts of yourself when writing a memoir. You're in the present, you're in the past, you're learning how to time travel in a way through writing your story. It's fun to learn. At least it is for me. I really think it's fun, and I think for you too, Brooke, to learn new skills, and then see them show up on the page.
Yeah, and what they say, I mean, there's a lot of focus going on with Alzheimer's, because I think June is Alzheimer's month, but what they say is that the learning new skills really does stave off dementia and Alzheimer's, and that the more you keep yourself learning, I mean, obviously there is a genetic link, so I'm not saying that people who have Alzheimer's or early onset or anything, might not be, but on the other hand, it's just in terms of, like you're saying, keeping your brain sharp and really engaging something. And I also just wanted to share something, because I was at BEA this last week with a bunch of my authors, and one of my authors shared with me that when her husband turned 50, he got a Ducati. And she said, this was like his thing that he wanted to do to reward himself or honor turning 50, and that for her, turning 50 was about finishing her book, and that it was the equivalent of getting a Ducati. And I just thought that was so awesome, because it was just something that it was on her bucket list, right? Something she really wanted to do. So see if any of these things resonate for you. If all of them do, fantastic. And all right, and if you're one of these crazy people, bravo. All right, so we're going to move into this question of what is memoir anyway, because it comes up for people even when they join our class, our long class especially, where people will ask us this question, am I writing a memoir? Sometimes there's a question of, can I do your class if I'm not writing memoir? And what does the term really mean? And I think it's a helpful question to recap. So we want to start with the question of autobiography versus memoir. And it's not wrong to write an autobiography. It's just important to understand what you're doing, because the scope of an autobiography is much longer than the scope of a memoir. And the best and most helpful definition that I've heard was when I sat on a panel with Samantha Dunn, who teaches memoir down in LA, and she said, autobiography is a story of a life, and memoir is the story from a life. And it's part of your life. It's a slice of life, which I'll be talking about in just a second. And it really is about scope, and it's not that it necessarily has to be 1 year or 5 years. It's not so much that. It's understanding the trajectory of what you're getting into. And if you're going to do something that is like the memoir you're writing right now, Linda Joy, which kind of does cover a large scope of your life, but it's incredibly thematic. So you guys can see in this third point here, I'm going to be talking about thematics and slice of life stuff. But autobiography is kind of like you're born, and then it's your whole life story, and it's much more plot driven. It's much more about the things that happen, and the you know, you buy a biography from someone like Bill Clinton because you're really curious what happened over the course of his life and what were the moments that shaped him. Memoir is much more thematic than that. It's not so much about the events that made you who you were, all of them. It's about certain events that made you who you were in the context of a limited scope, which is why some people have multiple memoirs in them that they don't even realize until they start learning the craft of memoir and understanding how small it can be and how full it can be when it's more limited in scope.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that, and we've taught some people, some of you know, the Mary Carr series, and Frank McCord, and so on, where they wrote several memoirs, and each of them come in at a different angle on their life, and it's instructive to read. So, journaling and journals versus memoir. Now, it's true that many people come to memoir having been journalers many years of their life, which is fantastic. And we're just hearing the Norwegian author Nusgaard on the radio yesterday, and he was talking about how he's writing about very, very personal things. This has been noted too, that he's a man and he's writing about these very personal experiences, and that this was mostly what women used to do. I guess there's been this, debate going on throughout, and it's still going on, about kind of who owns the home turf and who owns the world kind of thing. But we don't ascribe that any one person or one sex does. But he was saying something interesting. He was pointing out that in the 70s, it suddenly became really a great idea, and ISNN kind of led the way, and lots of other people who were teaching memoir, who were teaching journaling, including my colleague Kay Adams. Journaling was what people were encouraged to do finally, and it finally led to 20 years later, kids are journaling in grade school, and it certainly wasn't okay before that. It was just, you're just keeping your little diary, isn't that sweet kind of thing. But of course, as you know, in your journal, you're just writing what you feel like writing. You don't give context. You don't worry about it. You need to not worry about it. You just need to write what you want to write. Don't worry about spelling, punctuation, nothing matters. But kind of getting stuff out of you and onto the page. And so transitioning into memoirs is it's part of that skill building that we were talking about earlier. And so in a memoir is written like a story, and later we're going to talk about the fictional tools. It's written like a story in which the reader doesn't know anything other than what you show them and share with them. So the journalers need to make that leap from this is what I know and this is what I have to say to learning about the craft of story, which I found really fun to do. But I came from journaling also, and I learned the hard way sometimes.
Yeah, and it's inspiring, and we know a lot of memoirists who keep their journals and who reference their journals, but a memoir is not a journal, of course, and I think there's that style that sometimes comes, and you feel it when you read it, that you feel like, this is journaling, because they're not extracting the craft points, which is so much of what we're focused on teaching in our long course. And to go back to the points I was saying earlier, just to recap, and then we'll move on since we kind of already touched on this, which is that this idea that memoir is thematic can be a little bit hard to wrap your mind around, especially if you've just been writing and writing and writing. But what I mean by that is, that it's centered around something, like perhaps a particular healing journey. Lots of examples of this abound. Maybe it's that you went through a divorce and came out the other side. Maybe it's that you raised a child on your own. Maybe it's that you were an addict and you got through. Maybe it's that you took a trip and you learn something about yourself and about the world as a result. So there's transformation, but that theme is figured out early on, and then you are paying attention to that theme and you're tending that theme throughout the whole book. And I talk about that a lot, like it's the kind of the fertile ground upon which you're walking as you're experiencing what you're experiencing, and remembering to tend to it and to talk about it and not to let it go underground, or for that fertile ground to go fallow in a sense, that it always needs to be there. So just to remember that. I already said that it's slice of life. So what does that mean? Well, you're just trying to figure out this context in which you're writing. So part of this is,
yeah. And that theme, like I just want to give an example, like my book is about 3 generations of mothers who abandoned their daughters. And as I got toward the end of the edits of it, I took out 55,000 words because they didn't fit with the theme, you know, so just to give an example of how that works.
Yeah, good point.
So
anything else on fictional tools?
Yeah, fictional tools. Well, this is fun. Okay, so in the fictional tools include, you see the list here, scenes, narration, and dialogue. People get confused about, you know, people talk and ask us questions, oh, can I fictionalize my memoir? And so sometimes I give a long answer before I find out what the person actually is asking me, and so I've learned to say, what do you mean? So sometimes they say, oh, I just want to change names. Well, that's not considered fictionalizing anything. That's considered good practice these days, and we do talk a lot more about that in our class. But that's not fictionalizing. Fictionalizing is making up something that literally did not happen, along the lines of what James Fry did that got him in trouble with Oprah. He was in jail, 3 hours, and he said it was 3 months or whatever that was. But you do have to shape personal events so that they make sense to somebody else. And by the tools include creating scenes where you pick a certain place and time and moment and bring the reader there. And there's narration that guides the reader through the story. And of course, dialogue is really fun to learn. And yes, you have to write it according to the emotional truth of what was going on at the time, because we didn't walk around with tape recorders while we were listening to our family, so we could write our memoir someday. But these are the things that really are tools, plus quite a few more, that get you to transition from, a journaling style to writing a memoir.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I have people pitch me. I mean, even at BEA last week, I was at the book expo, and someone walked up and said, well, I have this fictionalized memoir. And the two terms just never go together. So I wanted to enlighten him a little bit and be gentle at the same time, but it's never a good pitch. It's never going to go over well with agents and editors.
Right.
Okay, so 5 strategies for getting started or for picking back up again. So lots of people who come to us for our classes or for our webinars are wanting to get started. They've always wanted to write a memoir, like it's the bucket list thing. I've thought about it, I want to do it, and it's hard. Yes, it's super hard. Sometimes it's actually very easy to get started, and then it's incredibly hard to continue, and we see that all the time. So these are things that you can do whether you're starting from the very beginning or starting back in from having given a little bit of a break, and so we'll just kind of run through these points.
Yeah, some of you have heard this before, but for some people it's a new idea that you can just make a list of significant moments, these turning point moments, as it says. And I've taught this technique for many, many years, and it's something that also especially works when people don't want to make an outline. They have outline phobia from English class or something. So these turning points, I mean, you can't write about everything that happened in your life anyway, and these significant moments help lead you to finding your theme. And so you start by writing a list of like 10 or 15 significant moments, and then take each of those and start writing, start writing your scenes, start developing them right away. Another technique that I've found helpful is writing from photos. And I know all of you have boxes and boxes of photos somewhere, or you have lovely albums if you were unlike me and put all those pictures away. But you know how evocative a photo is and how much it brings memories back to you. So that's another way to get started, is just write what's in the photo and what you're seeing and what you remember if it's a photo from your era. And let's see, am I going to talk about...
Yeah, you have it.
Yeah, okay.
You do have the next one, too.
That's right. So this whole idea, too, that really helped people, I just went to a meeting with some of my writer friends, and they had created these vision boards where they had taken magazines and phrases, inspirational phrases, and created a vision board to keep the imagery of what they're writing about in front of them. You can put some photos on your vision board, you can create collages. And years ago, when I was an art student, I did autobiographical art. I didn't know it would lead me to being a memoir writer one day. But I was trying to understand the people in my life that I didn't know very well by creating collages and art about their images and about their life. And then lots of people swear by music, you know, getting a great Pandora station or having your own selection of songs, especially if you're writing from a particular era. It's extremely evocative. I watched the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame the other night, and I couldn't stop watching it because some of those songs just like, you know, really brought back some of those eras. So whatever can help you keep going are things that you should be doing.
This is a little bit like a transmedia approach, and it's important because really one thing that memoirists or aspiring memoirists sometimes forget is that they are artists. And so there are all these ways that you can bring out the artist in you and that inform your writing. And then some people come to memoir from being truly self-identified as artists. And so either way, whether it's something you need to embrace more or whether it's something that you feel very familiar with in terms of your own self-expression, finding ways to incorporate lots of different visual and auditory elements into what you're doing is huge. I mean, it really does make a difference, both in terms of your creativity, but also in terms of staying on track, which is part of what we're about. So my 2 points are to print out what you have and take an inventory. So what this literally means is we have a lot of people who come to us who just have a lot of content. They've been writing for years. They don't really know what they have. It's the beginnings of a memoir, but it's also very overwhelming. I had one woman who came into class who had 160,000 words. It's a lot. I mean, that's something like 400 or 500 pages of writing, and she was obviously and understandably very overwhelmed by that. And so the very first thing that I said to her was, you really need to take an inventory of what you have and try to start to break down what you have into scenes or into chapters that are like a little bit compartmentalized in terms of what they are. So many of you, I hope that not all of you are dealing with that kind of content, no matter what you have, even if it's just a few pages. Starting to take an inventory is a really good beginning to basically, it's a support system for you, and it's also a good habit to have as you start to write your memoir, to know what you have and to take kind of like I call it cliff notes, actually, kind of like the cliff note version of your own writing and of your own manuscript, because doing that helps you to keep in your brain all the different pieces that you have, which you just can't do once you're dealing with that kind of content. So put it in a 3-ring binder and occasionally just print out and let yourself have that luxury to just, and also see the pages grow, which is really exciting.
I just did this exercise, and I was like, oh, is that where that idea was? I mean, you don't remember when you've written 60,000 words at this point, or 70. I don't remember what the beginning was. And so then I reread it and marked it up, and, you know, you're going to talk about marking up next, so that's great.
And for marking up your themes, exactly, just taking color coding, highlighting. The coolest thing about printing out your manuscript, even if you only have 20 or 30 pages, is to write in the margins. It's really helpful to not have that compulsion that the keyboard offers you to self-edit as you go, because while, yes, self-editing is a fantastic thing, it can also become something that is an endless cycle. And when you're really trying to see your memoir in thematic terms, having it on the page and something that you're not allowed to hit the delete key, and then to find a way, like using a highlighter or some other things, or, you know, sticky notes or whatever you use to do that sort of tracking of your themes, is a really, really helpful way to keep the big picture.
And just to add something, we want to help you think about this early on, or if you're coming back to your memoir, because ultimately, as you keep writing, it'll help you write better and better pages, really, as you go through the rest of the book. And you don't want to get to the end and feel overwhelmed and, oh, go, I don't even know what to do with this. If you have some of these techniques under your belt, you get closer to the end and go, hey, this is coming along, you know, I've got my themes, I'm using scenes, you know, I'm using these techniques, and it really helps you feel even better when you get closer to the end.
And I really think holding the big picture is a key to successful memoir writing. That it's very difficult if you're taking month-long breaks and then coming back to your writing and you're just like, oh my gosh, where have I been? So that's another reason for the discipline of writing and for having a practice or being in a class, you know, an obvious asset to that. But this habit that you can get into to print out, to mark up, and there are just different ways that you can support yourself to keep the ideas of what you've already done closer to you.
You have to sleep with it.
You do, under your pillow.
Actually. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to share a few success stories just because we find these to be inspiring, and people ask us a lot what the success rates in our class are. It's not like we're statistical about it, but we have had some real success stories, and we also know that success stories vary from person to person in terms of what those things are. So, well, we can go back and forth, Linda Joy. So I'll start with a woman who, this is both success story / cautionary tale. We had a woman in our class who basically, like halfway through the 6-month class, she got an agent, and she was very excited, and the agent bought the memoir, as many do, on proposal. So she had the concept and like maybe 1 chapter written, and then the agent had all kinds of ideas for her and was really excited about the project, and basically got our student into tinkering mode. You know, she was just focused much more on the proposal than she was on the actual writing, and she fell off of her homework and blah, blah, blah. And so it was exciting, but at the end of the day, when the agent didn't sell the book after many, many months, the author was still where she started with us, you know, in that she had basically written like this 1 or 2 chapters. And I've seen this happen all the time, even outside the context of our class. So the success story was the interest, you know, first of all, obviously. The rest of it is less of a success and more of a cautionary tale. But the second success is that she came back. She came back and she finished her memoir. And the agent who was interested in her work had kind of let her go, and she had renewed interest, actually, because the agent kind of felt like, you know, before we were selling something that wasn't complete, and so she did go back to kind of a second tier of publishers and is shopping it now. So it's just interesting. I always am thinking about this thing about what is the journey of any given writer to completion or to publication. And you can oftentimes be really shocked at the meandrous journey that happens, but it's still a success story. So they're shopping their book.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, I know. I remember. And we had a student, too, who she came kind of from the journaling world, and very wonderful and smart person, but didn't understand really what was needed in terms of scenes and the techniques. It was just new to her. And so finally one day, I think the light bulb went on, and she went, oh, okay. I mean, I remember light bulbs going on for me when I go, oh, this is what they're talking about. I see. I finally get it. So that takes whatever it takes. But she was in the class, and she kept hearing us talk about these things over and over again. And she went on to develop her book, and she stuck with it, and now she's going to be published this coming year through She Writes Press, which is the press that Brooke is publisher of. And so we're very excited. But mostly what we saw, and you hear these phrases at times, these sayings, but what we find too is the people who achieve success are the people who keep going. You know, they just keep going. And they eventually get where they want to get, and they fall down and they, you know, bruise their knees and they get back up, but they keep going.
Yeah, perseverance is so critical. So, and we're thrilled to have her. And I think we have on She Writes Press 2 authors who have come out of our class and into She Writes Press so far. So I hope to have more. But we're a good catch-all for memoir writers who have a really powerful story to tell. And then the other story that I want to share in terms of success story is a woman who she had a beautiful memoir, but a quiet memoir. And one thing about traditional publishing is that traditional publishing, they often are not very focused on the quiet memoirs. You'll hear things like literary memoir is very difficult to sell. It is because they're looking for things that are a little more blockbuster, whatever that means, whatever commercial means. I won't get off on a tangent about what that is, but the idea is that it just is kind of heavy hitting and that you can describe it in a sentence and that the agent on the other side can envision it as a movie. You know, it's going to be the next Wild or whatever it's going to be.
Oh,
so
no pressure, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this one was very discouraged by the traditional world and was getting like, I love your memoir, but kinds of rejections. And so I just encouraged her. She had a regional memoir, actually, and I thought it would be appropriate to try to get published on a university press, because you guys would be surprised, but lots of university presses and small presses are publishing memoir, but it just has to be a good fit for them. And so after trying to get agents and getting more rejections than she felt comfortable with, she went directly to some university presses and landed a deal that way. So one of the things that we don't focus a ton on shopping or necessarily landing an agent or landing a publisher, but obviously that is the end goal for a lot of the students, but not all of the students that we work with. But I am somewhat focused on publishing, although I'm obviously super supportive of self-publishing and hybrid publishing, which is what I do. And so we do try to steer people into thinking about the different publishing options that exist. And at the end of the day, your book being in print is it is the end goal. And I'm personally always interested in people seeing their book in print, and there's so many different ways to do that. So we're supportive of authors all the way to the finish line.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a particularly the legacy interest or the healing reason is they want to get it written so they can see it on the page, and maybe they just go to one of the self-publishing companies like CreateSpace, for instance, which can do it very inexpensively, and get it bound. And I know people who just want to do that and have a few copies for family. That's their goal. And as we say, well, you want your family to be able to really enjoy it. So if you learn how to use these techniques that we're going to teach you, they will enjoy it more than if you don't, if you don't have those skills.
Well, and to be proud of it. I mean, that's the thing that is about the quality. One of the things that Linda Joy and I are both emphasized on, and you see this a lot more in the self-publishing community too, is that anyone can go out and do a desktop publishing version. CreateSpace does not vet. You can publish anything you want. You can publish something that is totally not ready. But more and more people, I think, today are like, I don't want to do that, because you've seen all these self-publishing horror stories of what is stigmatized about self-publishing is that so many people did that without really thinking of the consequences. But the consequences are actually embarrassment. That people read something that is not ready, and we are finding a much higher level of sophistication and desire to learn, to go back to that point of wanting to learn a new skill and to really not just learn how to write, but to be a writer. So we're focused on writing, but our classes really focus on processing craft, and the writing just, once you really understand the craft, like Linda Joy was just saying, the click moment. I see the click moment happening a lot with people when they really understand what scene is. All of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I'm writing in scene. This is amazing. And it's a story, and it's come to life, and it's very exciting.
Comes to life. But the other thing that we're processing, just to mention it, I think it's so obvious we don't even think of saying it, is that people are writing and processing their experiences. They're processing, well, this happened to me, and oh my gosh, I didn't know I was going to jump into these memories. I'd almost forgotten. And we think it's important to provide everybody a context in which it feels safe and it feels okay to do that. And so I just want to throw that in there as it's another layer that sometimes surprises us.
Yeah.
Not us, but can surprise the student, can surprise the writer.
Yeah, anyone who's writing, absolutely. All right, so there's some questions coming in, but start loading them, because we're getting there. We're going to move into question and answer here in just less than 5 minutes. We're going to just tell you about our course, which is starting July 1. So
I believe it is exactly a month.
Yeah, a month from today. And so we're giving an exclusive offer tonight for people who are on the webinar that you can get $200 off and an opportunity to save another $100. So you actually could conceivably save $300 on the course. For people who are listening to the recording, we're only going to give $100 off. So it's kind of the 100 plus 100 possibility to save 200. But we did want to really give an opportunity for those of you who came tonight. So thank you for that. We will also be giving you my book, How to Sell Your Memoir, which is helpful once you get there, once you get farther down the road. And also a download to our Liars Club class, which we finished last month and which will be available for sale at some point, but we have not archived it yet. So we do love to provide these free webinars, as I said, but we're also interested in having people join us for the long course. It has been hugely successful for us, it just in terms of the class itself, but people's response and people's commitment to memoir and all that they're learning in this class. So you can go and email us questions. If you're like, I don't know, lots of people kind of want to ask some questions. The full syllabus is online. So
and we also listen to the needs of each class. We have kind of a syllabus that we go by, but then if we notice that we need to cover this more than that, or we need to drop down or slow down or something, we change our syllabus. We change our classes as needed with each group. So it's not a cookie cutter approach. I mean, we're always changing what we're doing so that it helps the people that we're actually working with more.
Yeah, and it's an important holding environment. Whether you can do this class now or down the road, or whether you join us for one of our 4-week classes, we're actually going to teach H's for Hawk in the fall, which is a best-selling memoir. It's a very modern, current memoir. We've been doing all of these classics from the early 90s when memoir sort of splashed onto the scene, but we really are focused on craft and process and trying to help you. The process of writing a memoir can be quite grueling, and when you're in it and you're alone, whether you take our class or not, to find a support system, find a buddy, find someone who is going to emotionally support you through that process, because I do think that that's one of the primary reasons people don't finish, is just because they hit up against that wall of, oh my God, this is way harder than I thought, and it's a contracting moment. So, and
when homework is due, by golly, it's amazing. People will do it. They'll turn it in. I wasn't going to write, but I invested in this class. I mean, I've heard that for years. I'm sure you have, Brooke. And when I'm writing, I go, well, I get more done if I have an appointment with someone, to give the work to them. Somebody's going to see it. So we do that. Accountability is this whole 6-month course.
So find a way to get that for yourself. Join us. We hope you will. And if you don't, find another way, because everyone who's on the call is here because they're either writing and they're slogging through, or wanting to get back to it, or starting. So we acknowledge where you are and welcome you in some capacity. And then this is just a quick announcement, Linda, about we're going to teach in person.
In our hometown, we're finally going to be teaching live together October 17th and 18th. It's our first in-person conference with Brooke and me, and we've been teaching together online for 3 years. And she's been teaching and coaching many years before that, and so have I. But we're bringing the show live and in person, and we do have an early bird special of $2.99 for 2 days. We're having an agent come. We're having a publishing panel. We're going to be dropping down and talking about writing through silence, how it is to write about the truth and the family, and get through all of those thorny subjects, as well as all these craft things. So it's going to be jam-packed those 2 days. It'll be great.
Yeah, you'll get to write, you'll get to meet an agent, you'll get to meet a publisher. So check out the, what we have going on. It's a very packed but well conceptualized weekend, if I may say so myself. So yeah, so this is just an announcement. We're formally announcing it today. Yeah. So, okay, whoa, we have lots of questions. Okay.
I can't see them, so you have to name them. All right.
Sorry, this is actually an important point. Someone says, if I register for the class, I'll talk to people separately about people who registered before and getting the discount. That's a yes. And if you purchase the class today, can you get the discount later? Yes, that's fine. And just if you purchase the class, you put down a $500 deposit. That is the same for everyone, no matter what. And then we'll work out the discount in the contract. So just FYI. And then another question, if the class is suitable for someone just beginning, absolutely. And feel free to email all these kinds of questions, because I can also, we'll talk to you one-on-one on the phone if you want to ask more questions about that. So these are all good points. A question about confidentiality, which I won't take up in the Q&A right now, but again, email me, Christina, if you're concerned about confidentiality, because we have policies for that. We really do take care of that and take care of you guys. Okay, so let's see. So please, let's talk about these questions. There's a question here about how do you keep going with your writing if you're writing about trauma, and this is one that we know well.
Right. Well, we work with this all the time, and then I taught that kind of work for about 10 years before working with Brooke. How do you keep going? Well, you keep going carefully. We recommend, and the people who do this research on healing trauma recommends that you write what I call the darker scene for 15 or 20 minutes at a time, and then balance it out by writing a lighter story, a happier story, or going and doing something else. And really don't spend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours in a row writing about trauma. You need to plan it out. And of course, in the course, we'd be helping you look at what your other themes are as well, and how would you weave the traumatic moments in with the other part of your outline that you have about your life.
Yeah, very helpful. That's a big one that we kind of push in the very beginning so that you don't get totally burned out or re-traumatized, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question from Marianne, I think. Part of the theme of my memoir would entail hospitals and organ recovery institutions, and I would need to include, not to call them out, but to emphasize the monumental pressures on the small person in turmoil. Can you name real names, or how would you handle that? You do need to be very careful. I have to say that you might want to consider changing people's names. I would advise that. Change people's names, change the circumstances. I worked on a book at Seal Press where an author wrote about a hospital where she was basically having kind of like an IVF style procedure, and she included what happened in that and about her doctor who was the treatment doctor, and she wrote all this stuff, and then she sent it to them actually to vet it, to approve it, and we got a cease and desist letter. and so the hospital was not happy with the way that she had portrayed the circumstances, and felt that it was not totally in line with their memory of what happened. And so this is just an interesting point that you come across, what Linda Joy and I experience all the time, right, is like, this is going to happen with your siblings, it's going to happen with your friends, with anyone. If you've lived the same experience as someone else, your memory of it is going to be different than someone else's, and it doesn't mean that you're wrong, but in places where there may be a point of contention and there could be any cause for someone to take out a suit, or especially if it's an organization or a hospital or something like that, you want to protect yourself.
Yeah, so you would have to do some changing, and also we recommend that people contact, especially if you're thinking of self-publishing, you need to contact your own literary attorney. But if you're going with a larger press, they will take your story and help vet it. But look how it turned out. I mean, there were still issues, and that's very troubling when that happens. However, it doesn't always happen. I mean, in many cases, people, they work it out, or they make an agreement or something, and so there's a huge range of things that are possible, but it's really good to know what those parameters are and do a little research about it ahead of time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you do need to be careful. So, and to our point, you're not lying if you change names, and even if you change full descriptions of people. So, Rosandra had a really good question. I'll look forward to hearing your answer about it. It says, could you address dialogue in memoir? A journalist who interviewed me when my memoir came out thought I should have written the book as fiction because of the dialogue. I think I think the journalist is wrong, but it's a huge compliment actually to say that the dialogue was so skilled that they felt like they were reading a novel.
But you see, there's different forms of nonfiction, and different people stand in different places, and journalists stand at a very, very conservative end, because they'll lose their jobs if they make stuff up. I mean, if they make up a dialogue, they can't do that. They have to have a transcript. They have to have a tape recording. Whereas in memoir, we're not in that position, but we are in a position of being as accurate as we can. That memoir is about memory, and you are going to be forming dialogue to create a scene or a situation or a conflict between people, or a conversation that you remembered from 50 years ago, and you didn't have a tape recorder. So journalists are very, very conservative, just to say that. And So we say, yes, you can create your emotional truth in dialogue.
And sometimes that is stylistic. You know, although Million Little Pieces got all the flack that it got for him, you know, fictionalizing a lot of the memoir, and that was a wrong thing to do. It's a beautiful book. I mean, I was rereading it the other day just for style, and I really love the way that James Fry does his dialogue and how he writes. And, you know, so you get to have a stylistic, creative license. And that's one of the things that we are very encouraging of in class, because people get very sterile slash, what is the word I'm looking for? Yeah, sterile. Kind of, yeah, like restricted. And then that comes out in the writing, and it can be boring. You know, it can not have flavor, and you know, you have to feel like you have that creative freedom to be able to write like that. So, okay, so Becky is asking, are composite characters considered fiction?
Not in our book. We're both going, no.
Yeah.
Composite, well, you know, but the journalist will tell you yes. Okay, so there are really different schools of thought on this. But again, we're the memoirists, and we're sitting here with this webinar, so we can tell you how we see it and how many other memoirists see it. Not all agree with us, too, but the majority of memoirists do talk about this in interviews, like Mary Carr and Dorothy Allison, and lots of other people talk about this, Catherine Harrison and so on, where you have to put yourself in the moment and see what works. And if you have 10 cousins and you went to a picnic and you tell everybody all about each 10 cousins, they're going to quit reading. I mean, we don't care about your 10 cousins. But what we want to know is what happened at the picnic with some cousins, with a group of cousins, that was actually significant enough that you want to include any of them. And then pick a few, and maybe there's other examples, you know, other than large numbers of people. But again, it's something to be careful of, and you don't just do it willy-nilly. But you know, it's not against the memoir rule to create composites. Go ahead, Brooke. You want to add something?
No, there's so many questions. We'll keep going. It's a great response. Jody says, so many of the memoirs that I personally love reading get slammed by critics for being self-indulgent. Knowing this response is so common often paralyzes me. Any advice?
Right. Oh my gosh. We feel for you. I was stomping around because of some recent post on the internet about how self-indulgent memoir was, and bunch of people on Facebook were complaining and posting and writing blogs, and I'll probably write one too. It's a very unfair, I mean, okay, so we can say, well, here and there, have there ever been a memoir that was self-indulgent? Yeah, just like there is fiction or poetry or anything else. But it's memoirs are now, you know, it's sort of like we're afraid to say anything. Like the memoir police are going to come and shut us down. And yet this is being said to people in a world where, look at all this stuff that is shared on Facebook, for heaven's sake. Half the time I have to scroll through really fast because I don't want to see it. I mean, it's a sharing world. So how are you being self-indulgent to explore your life, your thoughts, your feelings, the important things that happen to you? No, this is personal history. This is, I think, each time I read a memoir, I learn something from someone that I wouldn't know otherwise, and I step in their shoes, and I get to live many different lives because of what I'm reading in the memoir. So we say no, it's not. We know it stops you, but we encourage you to have it not stop you.
Well, and again, finding a support system for that of people who feel the way we do. I also wrote a post on Huffington Post that would be pretty easy to find about memoir bashing, because it's something that is just very common, and why, you know, I won't get into my thesis here, but why people memoir bash and why it's disproportionately toward women. You know, there's some problematic cultural stuff going on, and so rather than buy into that, or, you know, kind of let that conditioning or socialization, you know, deter you from your passion, we really say just, you know, own it and
have the passion to write the story that you want to write, and hang around people of like mind, like Brooke is saying, because, you know, all that stuff is out there, but we need to not take it in.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to take one question about the course because I think it might be helpful to other people about how much one-on-one time is included in the structure. So you each get 2 15-minute coaching sessions with your assigned memoir, and that is mentor. Oh, sorry, did I say memoir?
Got memoir on the brain for some reason.
That's weird. And then the class is every other week for 6 months. And so all of this is very detailed on the website, so do go check it out. And then do we teach examples of other memoir, or is it all instruction, writing prompts? So it's all of it. I mean, we do use a lot of example. We do, it's some lecture, it's some sharing and check-in, it's some example of other writers. And this, one of the reasons we're testing out this webcam is to see if we're going to do some more of this. We're integrating a lot of the kinds of things that we do in the shorter courses of teaching by example because people find that so helpful. So, you know, we're always growing our class and finding innovative ways to both interact with you, but also to bond the class, which is one of the reasons people want to keep writing is because of this support system that we've now mentioned several times. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to keep moving down. We're not going to get to everybody's questions, but thank you for your questions. Oh, one final question. How many people do we allow in the course? We do cap it at 14. So 14 is the max. How do you handle gaps in your family history that are important to the story and gaps you're unable to fill through research? We skip this one.
I've done that one. You use your imagination. I've had to do this because I didn't know what happened to my mother, couldn't figure things out. I did some research and I didn't get any definitive answers, but I got a sense through what I could find and what I could not find of my mother, who, I mean, was a very complicated person that I wrote about in Don't Call Me Mother, but I'm writing some more about her in my new memoir. Your imagination is part of a tool that you can use as long as you're telling the reader that you're using your imagination. Like, I can just see her. I imagine that she was 16 years old and she was wearing such and such clothes, and these are the dreams that she had. I'll never know. But then it made me wonder about da-da-da-da-da, because there are things you will know about that you can connect with and with your imagination. And we help people with that. It's something that comes up quite a bit.
Great. That's good. So I'm looking, if you guys are wondering why I'm looking over here, it's because I'm looking all
You're reading the
coming in, trying to multitask. Okay, so Diane is asking if we've taken the course again before, can we take it again? That must be Diane Wheaton, and the answer is, of course, we welcome you back and appreciate the endorsement.
Several people have done that, and they just said, you know, the first time around they were learning all this new stuff, and then then they worked on their books, and then the second time around they're like, oh, you know, they have this real deeper aha. It's been really kind of fun.
We've had 4 people retake it. It was great. Okay, so Marianne is asking, I'm wondering if during the first draft it's okay to use real names and then change the names later, because, yes. I mean,
that's what I recommend, because you're thinking in terms of the person that they were, you know, by their name, and you're going to get much more authentic emotional reaction, and then you change it in your final draft.
It's very confusing to try to remember all the fake names that you've given people too, and you're going to feel so much more connected to the people, and you don't have to share it. I mean, that's the thing that we always are so adamant about. I mean, you have a sacred group that you share with, or person. You know, if it's in our class, it's your mentor. If it's out in the world, find one person, and then don't feel that you don't put the cart before the horse. You know, don't do all this stuff because you're thinking about publication and you're not there yet, and then all you're really doing is kind of standing in your own way and, you know, preventing authenticity and connection in some ways by the distancing. All right, it's already 5, so this has been fun, 5 on the Pacific Coast. Thank you all so much for your great questions, and please, if you didn't get your question answered, do email us, and I'm certainly available, and so is Linda Joy, to vet questions about the course and other ideas that you might have. Yeah. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
All right.
Take care.
Have
Keep writing.
evening.
Bye-bye.
Writing. Bye.